Hi there, this is Dave Opdahl with Falcon Financial Group. Welcome back. Today, what we're going to be looking at is a very simple concept that I think will help a lot of users who are struggling to understand their full vendor uh, uh, purchasing power, if you will, by virtue of the fact that within Business Central, oftentimes credit card invoices mask the actual vendor relationships. In other words, the vendor may be American Express or Visa, but there are vendors within the vendors, right? So all those individual purchases are to vendors, and so by virtue of that, oftentimes we lose sight of that, right? So let's take an example. Let's suppose that you have an account with Staples, right? You have a business account. All your purchasing goes through the business account. But you also have purchasing cards that have been handed out to staff who go out and maybe they make purchases online or they're on a trip and they have to stop in at a Staples and purchase something. And rather than putting it on the company account, they pay for it with their purchasing card or their credit card. So from an invoicing perspective, if we only look at the invoices that Staples sends us, then we're going to get a more limited view of how much purchasing we actually do with Staples, as opposed to if we could tie in those credit card transactions, then we get a fuller picture of our purchasing activity with Staples or any vendor for that matter. Any vendor where you have transactions that are on the credit card statement. So here what we're going to talk about today is how to use a dimension code to achieve that. So let's take a look. So the first place we're going to stop and take a look is in our dimensions. So we're going to, oops, if I could type today, that would be great. So we're going to go to our dimensions. And I've created a dimension called vendor or vendor dim. Okay. So I've created a special dimension code. If I come up to look at my values, I can see that I have created a series of dimension codes that are equivalent to the vendors that I have in Business Central. In addition to that, I have also added a couple of vendors who are not vendors within accounts payable, but they are vendors who show up on the credit card statement regularly. Okay, so there's a distinction here. So from the very beginning, from 10,000 through V00060, I have actual account payable vendors. For V90,000 and above, I'm capturing all of those vendors who I don't have a direct relationship with in terms of purchasing or payables, but I do have a relationship by virtue of my staff goes out and builds relationships or purchases from these vendors and through credit cards. And so that relationship gets masked a little bit. So we're going to try to pull that all together here. So we've got these two that are separate. So we've got our vendors set up here, our vendor dimension. We've got our vendor dimension codes set up. If we go to the general ledger setup page, the next step would be to set that up as one of our shortcut dimensions. So as you can see here under the shortcuts, I've got shortcut dimension code 8 set to vendor dim. Okay, so that's important. So that's the setup. That's as much setup as you have to do in terms of the actual setup. Now to configure some of this, we do have to go to our vendors, right? And let's take a look at our vendors. And I've already set this up for purposes of this video, but I do want you to take a look and see. So if I look at, say, we're going to use Big Box Office Supplies Inc. That's discrete enough. So let's pull this open. And what you'll be able to see here is that we've already defined a dimension value for that. Okay. So for big box, I have vendor number V00050, and I've assigned a default dimension of the same code with the same name, and used a value posting of the same code. Okay. So let's see how that works. So let's suppose that, let's just look at a very simple situation where I do have a vendor on, big box office supplies. And I'm going to use big box office supplies, and I'm going to pay the invoice that came in. So this is nothing new, nothing exciting. We're just going to create a standard purchase invoice. And let's see, as it comes up here, eventually, there it is. All right, so I have my vendor, name. I just need to be able to fill in the invoice number, and I'm going to call this test 1. And I'm going to come down here, and I'm just going to load this up, or set this up for office supplies. And so I'm just going to select 1. I'm going to say it's $150. And I'm going to say this is for my company, Atlanta. And my department code is ADM. And as you can see, the vendor dimension code automatically gets populated, because if we look at the document dimensions, okay, I have a vendor dim of V00050. Again, that's just coming in from the vendor card. Nothing magical about that at all. So we're going to close that. And if we look at this transaction, what this shows us is we have the V00050 on the header. We also have it down here in the lines, right? Which makes sense, because we're paying big box for the actual purchases made from big box. Okay, so it makes perfect sense that the whole thing be set up that way. So let's look at the preview posting and take a look at that. So we're going to do our preview. Oops, company code. Oh, bear with me a sec. Forgot a code. And it's going to be ATL. Great. Okay. So if we go drill down on the general ledger, again, this is nothing new. This is just to provide a basis here. We see an invoice. We have the expense. We have the accounts payable. The expense is going to these, company department, but it's also going to vendor dimension V0050. Okay, and our which is the same as our vendor number. Okay, or our source number. So we're going to go ahead and post that. So let's post it. Post it, yes. All right, I'm not going to go to the posted invoice, but we are going to go back to our vendors. And this time I want to do a credit card payment or a credit card invoice. So I'm going to select a purchase invoice here. And there it goes. Test MX. All right, and so here I'm going to use the same account, 64100. Right, 1. And this is going to be 200. And so you can see that here, remember our vendor number for Amex is V00060. And so it has automatically filled that in because, again, it brought it in as the default for that vendor. But in this case, that's really not the case, because what I want to do is I'm not buying anything from Amex, but I am buying something from Big Box, right? And maybe I come down to my next line and scroll over a little bit. There we go. And I'm just going to type hotel, and there's nothing. Let's try travel. Ah, there we go. Okay. And let's suppose it's one, and let's say it's 1,500, and again, it's Atlanta, and it's the finance people because they always go to the nicer places. And now we go and look and say, okay, well, but what vendor is this really, right? Again, it's not Amex. It's big hotel chain, right? These are great names. So now we'll do one more, and I'm going to do this rental, right? So rental vehicles, there we go. And do one, and maybe the rental vehicle was $250. And again, whoops, that's not correct. And in this case, I'm actually looking for clunky car rental. All right. So now what I have, and let me do this before I forget, because I will forget. I forgot to put my company code in the header. No, I don't. So now I have a very different situation, right? I have a vendor for whom I have an open invoice. As I've gone through and identified the line item transactions, I have assigned each one to a different vendor. In other words, who is the vendor from whom I am actually purchasing this? Not just the financing mechanism being Amex, but who's the actual vendor, right? And so we have something like this that's going to give us the ability to tag these specific vendors on these lines. So let's take a look at a post preview. Okay, we'll go to the general ledger again. And so here we see that the liability goes to V00060, which is Amex, which is correct. But we have our expenses going to 3 other vendors, or referencing 3 other vendors. Okay, these are not impacting accounts payable at all. Okay, payables is still more just concerned about paying this line item here. So we're going to go back, we're going to post this, and then we're going to take a look and see how this plays out. And it's going to play out on the general ledger. Because obviously all of our transactions with dimensions typically land on the general ledger, so it's really important to get there. And actually what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to go to the general ledger entries page. General ledger entries. And I'm going to create some filters. Actually take it off of the analysis view. And I'm basically going to filter this. Oh, nope, too many clicks. Okay, now we're going to filter it. So we're going to look at posting date, and I'm just going to make this okay, it's going to trim that. I'm also going to look at account numbers, just the 60,000s and above. Okay, so here you can see we have a list of the transactions. These transactions have, in many cases, been applied to vendor, well, we have the source vendor here. So this is the actual payables vendor, the source number. If we scroll over a little bit, we will see, should see, there it is, the vendor dimension. Okay, so as you can see here, here's a disparity, right? So here's an Amex bill that's actually paying for big box office supplies. And here's a big box invoice paying for big box and so on. And so probably the better way to look at this is to break it off into an analysis mode. And let's just take a look at it in this way. Okay, so here's our vendor dimension code. So if I open this, let's look at this, because this is again starting with the vendor dimension code, not the actual accounts payable vendor. And what we can see, I'm going to close this for a minute just so we have a little more view. We can see that our actual spending with big box office supplies is $12.85, and that some of that is truly coming in off of big box supplies invoices, but some of it is also coming in off of Amex bills. Okay, so if I were to go to payables, and if I look at the vendors, and let's just go and take a look at big box office supplies. Okay, and I'm going to look at the statistics. So instead of $12.85, which I think is what we saw a minute ago, our view is limited to $10.50 because that's what the actual purchases were based on accounts payable, excluding the credit card payments or the credit card purchasing. So this is where that kind of brings that distinction together. You can now report from the general ledger looking at the actual dimension code and being able to report on the dimension code in a way that gives you a broader view of what your overall purchasing and purchasing power and leverage looks like by vendor, not just looking at it from an accounts payable perspective. So I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions, please reach out. If you have comments, leave them in the comments. Glad to hear it. If you have other ideas, I'm more than happy to hear those. And please check back, and we'll have additional videos and things coming through. So if you like what you see, let's just please let me know. Appreciate it. Have a good day. See ya.